time ago. Knew a calm roll, even though he was young, he was out of control. Addicted to weed and the pills and the coke. Listen to how the story is told. Lame little nigga, 23 at a time with a cashier job, living with his mom. Cool as a fan, like a breeze from the fridge. How we really came off, we all first thought. Knew the same homies, he thought he had hype. Little did we know he was down a shitty road. Tried to sell weed from a Billy Frank White, never really had any clientele on his phone. Always played cool when it came to my niggas. Every now and then he was low with the bread. Every other time it was me and my niggas on the side. They would talk about taking his head. I sold packs way before he did, and even at that I sold shit to him. But now this little nigga trying to flip the script. He better chill before I go and split his lip. On the real, he was living off his lies. Even tried going side by side with the boss at the time. Day by day getting word on the street. He was all around slipping and I couldn't let it slide. He closed it in, fucking up his job till that bitch got fired and he couldn't pay shit. Cornball nigga wasn't safe in his home. Avoided stepping out, never took a big risk. Then he lashed out and was rehab bound. About damn time he had to sit his ass down like wow. Throw pain in your face, you a lame a clown. Play too many games, just look at you now. Look at you, 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 look at you now. Can't stand to hear you, how do you sound? Just look in the mirror, look at you now. Look at you, 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 look at you now. Can't stand to hear you, how do you sound? Just look in the mirror, look at you now. Alone in his own while they roam self-loathing, hello Arizona. Stuck in rehab in the world of atonement. Stories about to get cold. 3 months in, had to come back to the home that he lost all because of his sins. Made a lot of foes that he once called friends. Now it's gonna get pretty grim. His right hand man always got treated, never got shit free. Was a nigga named Sam. Yeah, who opened his wallet, even the bread, a home with no grits till he robbed his whole fam. Damn, that is little nigga on the run. Now we wanna change from the bullshit he done. Nigga try to use pills in the code. Now everybody knows that he's a motherfucking joke. Then he left town and sown with his greed and never did rob him. He went in no deed. I didn't hear shit till I called Frank White and was damn right. Now you just dead little bitch. Can't give love if you don't have none. Never do drugs if you never had some. His situation is a tight one. End of the day, you lost the fight, son. Wow. Look at you, 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 look at you now. Can't stand to hear you, how do you sound? Just look in the mirror, look at you now.
Blood and crust around my eyes. I try too much, I'm paralyzed to undermine the seething cries I had. That's what you did. I find the only way that I could win is if you gon' apologize. I lost it, I lost it, I lost it in your gorgeous eyes. The way I cannot compromise. You fucked up, now you dead inside. I left you with the tune that lies my heart. When I just realized the only way to go up is apart. That's where my art is. That's the only way to start this successful mission apart. And I bid you, this is my parting gift. As I start my morning shift, I just hope you seen the shift. Just like when I seen that shit, your phone was blowing up and shit. I ain't said, I just up and dip. So when I'm fucking shit, just know I'm never thinking of the stuff you did. Money making, you ain't never about to see the spots of this seed I planted when I thought that you was helping garden it. Weed I'm smoking, it's the shit that we were going sparking shit. Put you on, bitch. This shit mine.
It's Keenan, Cunnin, Brothers Grimm. As I sit back and the days speed by, I believe these cats keep claiming facts are true, but indeed they're lies. It's only after 2 or 3 in a pack of brew you'll see the time. That's why I capture scenes like an afternoon in the back of a beat-up ride. Find me fast asleep trying to catch some Z's while these packs of weak punks rhyme. If you ask for me and you have the fee, I charge for a beam up fine. Shit, you could have some beats if you ask, say please, and you actually read up on all the stacks of sheets I scrapped in heaps since back when rap was sweet and you didn't have to be so wrong, right? Now it's clean up time. Picked the wrong life, you should clean up yours, cause I cleaned up mine. She's a wrong wife, should've seen the signs, kept a prenup sign. But it's alright, this ain't CB4, you think you can see me 9. Y'all ain't hardcore, this ain't parkour, you think this is easy, try. It ain't all war, but it's hard to ignore, find some peace and quiet. Y'all ain't hardcore, this ain't parkour, you think this is easy, try it. It ain't all war, but it's hard to ignore, find some peace and quiet. It's all par for the course,
Or are things over here supposed to stay the way you like them? Everybody in his place.
I didn't ask for this mission.
Oh, that makes me feel better. You didn't ask. That changes everything.
I didn't ask, but I expected soldiers.
Polo down like Tyson Beckford. Polo. Strategic with the moves like I work a chessboard. In the kitchen whipping like I run a mess hall. Flipping fine crystals like I sell the best salt. It's all politics and gang culture. What? Ain't no credits left once this game's over. No. Fully loaded out the Range Rover. Killed them with the cig like chain smokers. Niggas switching teams when the cane potent. Count your blessings quicker than an auctioneer. Count them. Leave haters flat like rotten beer. Gucci this, Fendi that with copping gear. Tell them. Extorted mad money out Obamacare. Moving big weight like a forklift. Cocaine. Ain't no swine ever with my forklift. Never. Chateau 1970 uncork it. I'll settle once we all on the Forbes list. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Everything I do is all gorgeous. Women in my coupe straight gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Everything I do is all gorgeous. Women in my coupe straight gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Gorgeous. Mwah.